And now on the line is Senator Mark Wall from the Labour Party. Mark, welcome back to Near FM.
Thank you very much, Darren.
Mark, I last spoke to you on Near FM around 10 months ago, and in that interview you were calling for the Gambling Regulation Act to be enacted and for the incoming Gambling Regulatory Authority of Ireland's powers to be strengthened. Well, I'm talking to you now, Mark, on Friday the 18th of October, and 2 days ago on Wednesday the 16th, there was great news coming from Leinster House. In broad terms, Mark, can you tell our listeners what the great news is?
Yeah, thanks very much, Darren. Thanks for having me back on again. The great news, Darren, is that we now have gambling legislation, and I would say almost fit for purpose in this country. We've been looking for this bill to come in since 2013, and previous to this, we were working from 1956 legislation. So that's how important this gambling bill is to so many people, Darren. And the fact that it is now true and that we have a gambling regulator set up for the first time in this country is a very important step forward for so many people, and indeed, I would say, Darren, for so many communities.
Okay, I know that yourselves in the Labour Party, Mark, want the gambling regulator to have strong powers so that, for instance, the gambling regulator would be the sole provider or funder of state-based problem gambling awareness and educational programmes. Mark, is the gambling regulator, Miss Anne Caulfield, and her authority going to be as strong as the Labour Party hoped and she and the authority would be in terms of having powers?
Yeah, well, that's a very important question, and obviously I wish the new gambling regulator the very best, Aaron, because it's a very important job that she has to do. You know, we would have went a small bit further with the gambling regulation as regards ads and maybe inducements, but the most important thing to say here is that this is a very important first step. This is legislation, as I said, we've been waiting for a long time, and it will make a difference for those that have a gambling addiction, those working with those that have a gambling addiction, and also for those that may develop a gambling addiction, because we need to see the social fund money that will come in from the gambling companies spent through the regulator in the right places and educating people about gambling harm and ensuring that we don't increase the numbers that we have with a gambling addiction in this country, Darren.
Yeah, because there is, at the moment and traditionally, a dearth of problem gambling and addiction services, isn't there? So much so that the gambling funded industry body has stepped in to fill some of the holes. That's true, is it, Mark?
That is true, Darren. And, you know, the last ERSI report that we had, they mentioned in their research that we have approximately 130,000 people in this country with a gambling addiction. And that is a growing figure and obviously a worrying figure. And we need to finance properly and resource properly those that I say are on the front line that you mentioned as well, Darren. And we haven't up to now. We've relied on the gambling companies themselves in the main to fund them. So the fact that the regulator will now control that money and ensure that those that are working day in, day out with those that need their help and need our help, Darren, is a very important step forward. And that is one of the most important steps in the fact that this legislation has now gone through.
Okay, Mark, by the time this interview is broadcast on the FM, the next general election may have been called. I understand that the gambling regulator, Miss Anne-Marie Caulfield, was named as the regulator 2 years ago. Would I be right in assuming that, like, because there's an upcoming general election, it probably won't be until the other side of the general election before we start seeing movement?
Yeah, well, look, obviously this bill has to go to the president first to make sure that it's rubber stamped, and I'm sure he will do that because our president has even spoken out in the past, as you're aware, Darren, in relation to gambling addiction and supporting those on the front line, and he's visited a number of the addiction services during his time. So, you know, that will happen. The election we're hearing today, maybe, you know, towards the end of November, that will happen. But I think the most important thing here now is that the Oireachtas has passed the legislation, so it is only a matter of time. And I and my colleagues in the Labour Party want to ensure that that is a very short time. So whoever's in government come the next general election, they need to ensure that the legislation is developed, worked, and that goes through for the benefit of so many people. So I don't think it's going to take that long. I think the minister was asked a number of questions to that effect in the Dáil in the last part of the debate, and he's indicated that we're only talking months and maybe the middle of next year when we will see everything up and running. And obviously, we all want that as quickly as possible, Darren.
And it is important, I think, in every department, like who the minister, senior and junior ministers are, is always important at the same time. So we don't know who's going to be in government after the next year election. So even though I think the gambling regulator will be working, do you agree that it is kind of important, like we have a good minister for next year?
Well, look, the legislation is there now, so whatever minister comes in and whoever's in the Department of Justice and after the next government, they will have to work with that legislation. And, as has been said by every member of the Oireachtas, if we need to develop, and indeed the minister, in fairness to James Brown, has said that if we need to develop or even change as we work through the gambling addiction in this country, then that will happen too. I think this has seen cross-party support, Darren. A number of us have spoken out on this over the last number of years, but that's been cross-party as well, because we see on the ground in my clinics, and in other representatives' clinics, the damage that gambling addiction is doing to people. We're not out here to ban gambling; it will continue, but we need to protect those that are vulnerable, and we need to help those with a gambling addiction and their families. So I think whatever minister is in place after the next election, they will continue to support this legislation, and I think any member of the Oireachtas will do that as well, Darren.